Hollywood's greatest massacre wasn't a war film, it was the rise of sound itself. When the talkies exploded onto the scene in the late 1920s, they didn't just change cinema, they buried careers overnight. Stars who commanded millions of fans suddenly found themselves voiceless, forgotten, and discarded like yesterday's newspaper. But what if I told you that some of Hollywood's most tragic casualties were also its most talented performers? Here are the silent legends who paid the ultimate price for progress. John Gilbert. Let's start with Hollywood's most famous victim, John Gilbert, the man whose downfall became the stuff of legend. Picture this. You're the biggest male star in the world, women swoon at your name, and your salary rivals today's A-listers. Then overnight, you become a punchline. Gilbert was MGM's golden boy, the smoldering heartthrob who set screens on fire in The Big Parade and Flesh and the Devil. His romantic scenes with Greta Garbo weren't just acting, they were cinematic magic that had audiences believing in love itself. But here's where the story gets ugly. When sound arrived, Gilbert's career didn't just decline, it was systematically destroyed. The myth says his voice was too high, too squeaky for his macho image. The truth? His voice was perfectly fine. Listen to his early talkies, and you'll hear a normal, masculine voice. So what really happened? Studio politics, pure and simple. MGM's Louis B. Mayer allegedly had a personal vendetta against Gilbert, possibly over a contract dispute or Gilbert's refusal to play studio games. Mayer used the talkie transition as the perfect excuse to torpedo Gilbert's career. The studio spread rumors about his voice, gave him terrible scripts, and watched as their former golden boy crumbled. By 1936, Gilbert was dead at just 38, his spirit broken by an industry that had once worshipped him. His story proves that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't change itself. It's the people who control how that change happens. Louise Brooks. Louise Brooks wasn't just an actress. She was a revolution wrapped in a bob haircut, with her razor-sharp bangs and eyes that could cut glass. Brooks embodied everything modern about the 1920s. She was the flapper made flesh, the woman who dared to be different in an industry obsessed with conformity. Her performance in Pandora's Box remains one of cinema's most mesmerizing displays of raw sexuality and intelligence combined. But Brooks had a fatal flaw in Hollywood's eyes. She couldn't be controlled. While other stars played the studio game, Brooks spoke her mind, criticized the system, and refused to be anyone's puppet. When Paramount demanded she return from Europe to dub her films for sound, she essentially told them to go to hell. It was career suicide, but it was also pure Brooks, uncompromising to the bitter end. The woman who should have been sound cinema's first great female star instead became its most famous casualty. Brooks returned to America to find her career in ruins, her bridges burned, and her name practically erased from Hollywood history. She spent her later years writing brilliant film criticism, proving she was as sharp with words as she had been with her on-screen presence. Here's the kicker. Brooks's films are more watchable today than 90% of what Hollywood produced in the 1930s. Her refusal to compromise preserved her artistic integrity but cost her everything else. She died in obscurity in 1985, but her legend has only grown stronger. Sometimes being too ahead of your time is the cruelest fate of all. Clara Bow. Clara Bow was the definition of it before anyone knew what it meant. She was jazz-age America personified, wild, free, and absolutely magnetic. When she walked into a room, you felt it. When she appeared on screen, you couldn't look away. Beau was Hollywood's first true sex symbol, the woman who made being a flapper look like the most fun you could have with your clothes on. Her rise was meteoric. From a broken home in Brooklyn to the toast of Hollywood, Beau's story read like a fairy tale. It made her an international sensation, and her personal life, filled with scandals, love affairs, and genuine authenticity, made her tabloid gold. She was real in a way that terrified Hollywood executives who preferred their stars manufactured and controllable. But Beau's Brooklyn accent was thicker than molasses, and her nervous energy translated poorly to the microphone. Worse, her personal life began overshadowing her professional one. Scandals involving her love life, gambling debts, and nervous breakdowns made her a liability. The woman who had embodied the Roaring Twenties found herself out of step with the more conservative 1930s. Bao retired at just 28, her career spanning less than a decade, but burning brighter than stars who worked for 50 years. She spent her later years on a Nevada ranch, raising cattle and trying to forget Hollywood ever existed. The tragedy isn't just that she left, it's that Hollywood let her go so easily. Bao proved that sometimes being too real, too human, too authentic is exactly what the industry can't handle. Emil Jannings. Emil Jannings was a mountain of a man with acting talent to match. The first person to ever win an Academy Award for Best Actor, Jannings was European cinema's gift to Hollywood, a classically trained powerhouse who could make you believe he was a Russian general, a German professor, or an American businessman with equal conviction. His performance in The Last Laugh remains one of silent cinema's greatest achievements. But Jannings had one insurmountable problem: his thick German accent. When Talkies arrived, his heavily accented English made him virtually unemployable in American films. Audiences who had accepted him as any character imaginable suddenly couldn't get past his pronunciation. The man who had won Hollywood's highest honor found himself persona non grata almost overnight. Jannings returned to Germany, where he continued making films, but this decision would haunt him forever. When the Nazis rose to power, Jannings stayed and became a prominent figure in Nazi cinema. Whether driven by opportunism, genuine belief, or simple survival instinct, his collaboration with the regime forever tainted his legacy. The man who had once been celebrated as one of cinema's greatest actors became a symbol of artistic compromise. The cruel irony? Jannings's silent films remain masterpieces of emotional truth and human complexity. His Nazi films are propaganda nobody watches. The talkie transition didn't just cost him his Hollywood career, it led him down a path that destroyed his reputation forever. Sometimes the roads we take when our first choice is blocked lead to places we never imagined and can never escape. Colleen Moore. Colleen Moore was America's sweetheart before America knew it needed one. With her Dutch boy haircut and impish smile, Moore practically invented the flapper on screen. She was the girl next door who happened to be a wild child, the perfect combination of innocence and rebellion that defined the 1920s. Her films made millions, and her personal life, surprisingly scandal-free, made her a studio executive's dream. Moore was smart, business-savvy, and ahead of her time. She invested her earnings wisely, created her own production company, and had creative control that most stars could only dream of. When sound arrived, she seemed perfectly positioned to make the transition. Her voice was pleasant, her acting skills were solid, and she had the business acumen to navigate Hollywood's changing landscape. So why did she walk away? Moore made a calculated decision that stunned Hollywood. She retired at the height of her earning power to focus on her personal life and business investments. While other stars fought tooth and nail to stay relevant, Moore calmly stepped off the Hollywood treadmill. She had made her fortune, proven her talent, and decided she had nothing left to prove. The woman who had helped define the 1920s spent her later years collecting rare dolls and living quietly in Chicago. She died wealthy, respected, and on her own terms, a rarity in Hollywood. Moore's story proves that sometimes winning means knowing when to quit. In a town where careers usually end in bitterness and disappointment, she wrote her own happy ending by leaving before the story turned tragic. Carl Dane. Carl Dane's story is Hollywood's cruelest joke. Born Rasmus Carl Thorkelson Gottlieb in Denmark, he became one of MGM's biggest comedy stars through sheer charm and impeccable timing. Dane's lanky frame and gentle humor made him perfect for the lovable sidekick roles that audiences adored. Paired with George K. Arthur, he formed one of the most successful comedy duos of the late silent era. But Dane's thick Danish accent was comedy gold in all the wrong ways. When Talkies arrived, his pronunciation turned every line into unintentional humor. Audiences who had laughed with him now laughed at him. The man who had been making $1,500 a week suddenly found himself unemployable. MGM, the studio that had made him a star, dropped him without ceremony. What happened next is one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking chapters. Dane tried everything: bit parts, stage work, even opening a hot dog stand outside the studio gates where he had once been a star. The irony was crushing, serving food to the very people who had once sought his autograph. His descent from star to street vendor became Hollywood legend, but not the kind anyone wanted to be remembered for. In 1934, Dane couldn't take it anymore. He was found dead in his apartment, a suicide that shocked even hardened Hollywood veterans. His death certificate listed his occupation as cook, a final insult to a man who had once made millions laugh. Dane's tragedy proves that the talkie transition wasn't just about careers, it was about human dignity, and sometimes the cost was too high to bear. Pola Negri. Pola Negri was Europe's answer to Hollywood glamour, a Polish firecracker who brought continental sophistication to American screens. With her dark eyes and dramatic intensity, Negri was the epitome of exotic allure. She was Rudolph Valentino's real-life lover, the woman who allegedly fainted at his funeral in a display of grief that captured worldwide attention. Her silent films crackled with a passion that made American actresses look tame by comparison. But Negri's heavily accented English was her downfall. When sound arrived, her pronunciation was so thick that American audiences struggled to understand her. The woman who had embodied continental sophistication suddenly sounded like a parody of herself. Studio executives, terrified of losing money on an accent they couldn't fix, began offering her smaller roles or none at all. Negri fought back harder than most. She took voice lessons, hired dialogue coaches, and even underwent surgery to improve her diction. But nothing could eliminate the accent that marked her as forever foreign in an industry increasingly focused on all-American appeal. By the mid-1930s, she had returned to Europe, where she continued making films but never recaptured her Hollywood glory. The woman who had once been Paramount's highest-paid star spent her later years in relative obscurity, occasionally appearing in films, but never again as a leading lady. Negri's story reveals the cruel xenophobia lurking beneath Hollywood's glittering surface. In the silent era, foreign stars brought exotic appeal. In the sound era, they brought subtitles, and Hollywood had no patience for either. Harold Lloyd. Harold Lloyd was the everyman hero, the guy with glasses who could do the impossible. While Chaplin tugged at heartstrings and Keaton amazed with athleticism, Lloyd made you believe that regular people could be extraordinary. His daredevil stunts, performed without safety nets or doubles, made him one of the most popular comedians of the silent era. That famous image of him hanging from a clock tower? That's not special effects, that's pure Lloyd. When sound arrived, Lloyd seemed perfectly positioned to succeed. His voice was fine, his persona was relatable, and his comedy had always been more physical than intellectual. He made several sound films, and they were okay. Not bad, not great, just okay. And for a star who had once been cinema's daredevil king, okay was devastating. The problem wasn't Lloyd's voice, it was comedy itself. Sound changed how audiences laughed. Physical comedy suddenly seemed old-fashioned compared to the rapid-fire dialogue of screwball comedies. Lloyd's carefully choreographed stunts looked quaint next to the verbal gymnastics of the new comedic stars. He was like a silent orchestra trying to compete with jazz. Lloyd retired from acting in the 1930s, but unlike many of his contemporaries, he stayed busy. He became a photographer, a Shriner, and even developed 3D photography techniques decades before they became mainstream. He died wealthy and respected, having transitioned from star to inventor. Lloyd's story proves that sometimes the smartest move is knowing when to reinvent yourself, rather than trying to recapture past glory. Norma Talmadge. Norma Talmadge was the thinking person's movie star, a woman who brought genuine intelligence and emotional depth to every role. While other actresses relied on beauty or charm, Talmadge delivered performances that stayed with you long after the credits rolled. She was part of the famous Talmadge sisters dynasty, but Norma was the crown jewel, the serious actress who could make you cry with a single glance. Her career spanned the entire silent era, from its rough beginnings to its polished peak. Talmadge worked with the best directors, appeared in the most prestigious films, and commanded salaries that rivaled any male star. She was Hollywood royalty, the kind of actress who defined what it meant to be a movie star. Her marriage to producer Joseph Schenck gave her unprecedented creative control and financial security. But Talmadge's voice was her Achilles heel. Not because it was bad, it was perfectly pleasant, but because it was ordinary. After years of watching her create magic through pure visual performance, hearing her speak somehow diminished the mystery. The woman, who had been larger than life, suddenly seemed human-sized. Her Brooklyn accent, barely noticeable in person, became glaringly obvious on screen. Talmadge made the smart choice. She retired gracefully in 1930, at the height of her earning power and with her reputation intact. She spent her later years managing her investments and living quietly in Beverly Hills. Unlike stars who fought the inevitable, Talmadge left on her own terms. Sometimes the greatest performance is knowing when to take your final bow. Ricardo Cortez. Ricardo Cortez was Hollywood's manufactured Latin lover, created to fill the void left by Rudolph Valentino's death. Born Jacob Krantz in New York, he was about as Latin as a bagel, but Hollywood needed a dark-haired romantic lead, and Cortez fit the bill. Studio marketing transformed a Jewish kid from the Bronx into a passionate Spanish aristocrat, complete with fabricated biography and exotic backstory. The amazing thing? It worked. Cortez became one of the most popular leading men of the late silent era, starring opposite major actresses and earning substantial salaries. He was smooth, sophisticated, and convincing in romantic roles. Audiences bought the Latin lover act completely, proving that in Hollywood, perception was more important than reality. But sound exposed the truth. Cortez's voice was pure New York, destroying the exotic image that had made him a star. His accent was wrong, his delivery was wrong, and suddenly the illusion crumbled. The man who had been marketed as a passionate Latin lover sounded like he should be selling insurance in Brooklyn. The disconnect between image and reality was too jarring for audiences to accept. Cortez adapted by reinventing himself as a character actor, playing gangsters, businessmen, and other non-romantic roles. He worked steadily through the 1930s and 1940s, but never again as a leading man. His career proved that Hollywood's star system was built on manufactured dreams, and when sound arrived, some dreams couldn't survive the harsh light of reality. Cortez's story is a reminder that sometimes the most successful career moves are the ones that abandon what made you famous in the first place. Corinne Griffith. Corinne Griffith was billed as the Orchid Lady of the Screen, and the name fit perfectly. She was ethereal, beautiful, and utterly captivating in a way that seemed almost supernatural. Griffith's beauty was legendary even by Hollywood standards. She was the woman other actresses wanted to look like. Her silent films showcased not just her looks, but genuine acting talent, particularly in romantic dramas where her luminous presence could carry entire scenes. But Griffith's voice was her career's death sentence. When she spoke, the spell was broken. Her voice was thin, reedy, and completely at odds with her stunning visual presence. The woman who had been cinema's most beautiful face suddenly sounded like a teenage girl trying to sound sophisticated. Test audiences were reportedly shocked by the disconnect between her appearance and her voice. Griffith made a few early talkies, but they were disasters. Studios didn't know what to do with a star whose greatest asset, her visual beauty, was diminished by her greatest weakness, her voice. She retired from acting in 1932 at just 38 years old, when she should have been entering her prime years as a leading lady. The woman who had once commanded top dollar for her beauty spent her later years writing romance novels and investing in real estate. She died wealthy and relatively forgotten, her name known only to silent film enthusiasts. Griffith's story is a cruel reminder that sometimes nature's gifts come with hidden costs. In the silent era, her voice was irrelevant. In the sound era, it was everything. Thomas Meighan. Thomas Meighan was the strong, silent type before that became a cliché. With his rugged good looks and commanding presence, he was the kind of man who could make you believe he could handle any crisis. Meighan was Paramount's top male star for most of the 1920s, appearing in prestige productions and earning massive salaries. He was the dependable leading man the actor-directors turned to when they needed someone to anchor a dramatic film. His career seemed built to last. Meighan was professional, reliable, and popular with both audiences and industry insiders. He worked steadily through the silent era, transitioning from romantic leads to more mature character roles as he aged. When sound arrived, there was no obvious reason why he couldn't continue his success. But Meighan's voice was his undoing. It wasn't terrible, it was just wrong for his image. After years of projecting strength and authority through his physical presence, his somewhat high-pitched voice made him seem less commanding. The man who had been believable as a powerful executive or military leader suddenly sounded like he was trying too hard to be tough. Meighan made several sound films, but they failed to capture the magic of his silent work. By the mid-1930s, he was relegated to supporting roles and B-pictures. He died in 1936, his career having faded just as the sound era was hitting its stride. Meighan's story proves that sometimes the most successful stars are the ones whose talents are perfectly suited to their time and tragically limited by that same specificity. Dolores del Rio. Dolores del Rio was Mexico's gift to Hollywood, a woman so beautiful that she made other stars look ordinary. With her perfect features and regal bearing, Del Rio brought an exotic elegance that American audiences had never seen before. She was the foreign beauty who could make you believe in romance with a single glance. Her silent films showcased not just her looks, but genuine acting ability, particularly in dramatic roles that required emotional depth. When sound arrived, Del Rio seemed perfectly positioned to succeed. Her voice was lovely. Her English was clear, and her accent was subtle enough to be charming rather than distracting. She made several successful early talkies, proving that foreign stars could navigate the transition if they had the talent and determination. But Hollywood's increasing xenophobia in the 1930s made life difficult for foreign-born stars. As America turned inward during the Depression, exotic appeal became less marketable. Del Rio found herself typecast in Latin Spitfire roles that wasted her considerable dramatic talents. Studio executives seemed more interested in her accent than her ability. Rather than accept diminished roles, Del Rio made a bold decision. She returned to Mexico and became the queen of Mexican cinema. She starred in prestigious films, worked with renowned directors, and became a national treasure. Her later Hollywood comeback in the 1940s proved she had lost none of her talent or appeal. Del Rio's story proves that sometimes the best response to Hollywood's limitations is to find a place where your talents are truly appreciated. Ronald Colman. Ronald Colman actually succeeded in talkies, becoming one of the most distinguished actors of the 1930s and 1940s. But his journey from silent star to sound icon wasn't guaranteed, and his story reveals just how precarious the transition could be, even for the most talented performers. Colman was British sophistication personified, a man who brought genuine class to Hollywood's often crude early days. His silent films showcased an intelligence and refinement that set him apart from the typical American leading man. He was the thinking woman's romantic ideal, the man who could make you swoon with his mind as much as his looks. When sound arrived, Colman had one massive advantage. His voice was pure gold. His cultured British accent was exactly what American audiences wanted to hear from a sophisticated leading man. But success wasn't automatic. Colman had to completely reinvent his acting style. learning to modulate his voice for the microphone and master the art of spoken dialogue. The transition was terrifying. One bad film, one wrong vocal choice, and he could have joined the ranks of the forgotten. Instead, Coleman became one of sound cinema's most respected actors, starring in classics like A Tale of Two Cities and Lost Horizon. His success was earned through talent, hard work, and a healthy dose of luck. Coleman's story proves that the talkie transition wasn't just about having a good voice. It was about having the intelligence and adaptability to reinvent yourself completely. He succeeded where others failed, not because change was easy, but because he embraced it completely. William Haynes. William Haynes was MGM's golden boy, the charming comedian who could make you laugh and break your heart in the same scene. With his boyish good looks and natural charisma, Haynes was the perfect representation of jazz-age youth. He was funny, likable, and absolutely magnetic on screen. His films were box office gold, and his career seemed unstoppable. But Haynes had a secret that was an open secret in Hollywood. He was gay. In the 1920s, this was manageable as long as he was discreet. The studio system was built on manufacturing images, and Haynes played along with the publicity machine. He dated actresses for the cameras and kept his private life private. It was the price of stardom, and he paid it willingly. When sound arrived, Haynes transitioned successfully. His voice was perfect for comedy, his timing was impeccable, and his early talkies were hits. But Louis B. Mayer had a problem with Haynes's sexuality and demanded he enter a fake marriage to protect his image. Haynes refused, choosing personal integrity over career security. The result was career suicide. Mayer systematically destroyed Haynes's career, offering him worse roles until he was effectively blacklisted. By the mid-1930s, the man who had once been MGM's top comedian was unemployable. Haynes reinvented himself as an interior designer, becoming hugely successful in his second career. He lived openly with his partner for decades, proving that sometimes the greatest victory is simply being yourself, regardless of the cost. Vilma Banki. Vilma Banki was Hungarian aristocracy made flesh, a woman who brought European sophistication to American screens. With her delicate features and ethereal beauty, she was the perfect romantic leading lady for the 1920s. Banki specialized in playing fragile heroines who needed rescuing, roles that showcased her visual appeal and emotional range. She was particularly effective opposite Rudolph Valentino, creating romantic chemistry that had audiences swooning. But Banki's thick Hungarian accent was career suicide in the sound era. Her English was heavily accented and difficult to understand, making her virtually unemployable in American talkies. The woman who had been the epitome of romantic perfection suddenly sounded like she was struggling with the language itself. Test audiences were reportedly confused by her pronunciation, unable to focus on her performance. Banki made a few early sound films, but they were disasters. Her accent was so thick that some theaters reportedly showed her films with subtitles, defeating the entire purpose of the talkie revolution. Studio executives, who had once fought to sign her, suddenly had no use for a star who couldn't speak clearly to American audiences. Rather than struggle with voice coaches and dialogue training, Banki made a dignified exit. She retired from acting in 1932 and returned to Europe, where she lived quietly with her husband, actor Rod LaRocque. She died in 1991, having successfully transitioned from movie star to private citizen. Banki's story proves that sometimes the most graceful career move is knowing when to leave the stage, preserving your dignity and your legend intact. Betty Compson. Betty Compson was the chameleon of silent cinema, an actress who could play anything from comedy to tragedy with equal conviction. She was one of the most versatile performers of her era, capable of disappearing into roles so completely that audiences sometimes didn't recognize her from film to film. Compson was the professional's professional. The actress, other actresses studied to improve their craft. Her career spanned the entire silent era, from rough two-reelers to polished features. She worked with every major director, appeared in every genre, and built a reputation for reliability and talent that made her one of Hollywood's most sought-after performers. Compson was the kind of actress who could save a bad script or elevate a good one into greatness. When sound arrived, Compson seemed well-positioned to succeed. Her voice was pleasant, her acting skills were unquestionable, and her experience was unmatched. She made several early talkies, and they showcased her continued ability to inhabit characters completely. But something was missing. The magic that had made her special in silent films didn't translate to sound. The problem wasn't her voice or her talent, it was the changing nature of stardom itself. In the silent era, versatility was an asset. In the sound era, audiences wanted consistency, wanting to know what they were getting when they bought a ticket. Compson's ability to be anyone meant she wasn't recognizably herself, and that became a liability. She worked steadily through the 1930s and 1940s, but never again as a leading lady. Her story proves that sometimes your greatest strength can become your greatest weakness when the world changes around you. Antonio Moreno. Antonio Moreno was the original Latin lover, the man who defined continental romance before Rudolph Valentino arrived on the scene. Born in Spain, Moreno brought genuine European sophistication to Hollywood, along with the kind of smoldering intensity that made women swoon and men envious. He was the romantic ideal made flesh, the man who could make you believe in passionate love with a single glance. His career spanned 2 decades, from the rough early days of cinema to the polished perfection of the 1920s. Moreno was a serious actor who brought intelligence and depth to roles that could have been mere stereotypes. He worked with the best directors, appeared in prestige productions, and earned the respect of his peers. His romance with actress Daisy Canfield, whom he later married, was one of Hollywood's most genuine love stories. But Moreno's Spanish accent was his downfall when sound arrived. His heavily accented English made him difficult to understand, and his pronunciation marked him as forever foreign in an industry increasingly focused on American appeal. The man who had embodied romantic sophistication suddenly sounded like he was struggling with the language itself. Moreno made a few early talkies, but they failed to capture the magic of his silent work. By the mid-1930s, he was relegated to supporting roles and B pictures. He later moved behind the camera, working as a director and producer, but never again achieved the stardom he had enjoyed in the silent era. Moreno's story reveals the casual xenophobia that the talkie transition exposed, showing how quickly Hollywood could discard the very qualities that had once made stars special. Priscilla Dean. Priscilla Dean was the good girl who played bad girls better than anyone else. With her dark hair and expressive eyes, she specialized in playing femme fatale, adventuresses, and other morally ambiguous characters. Dean was the actress who could make you root for the villain, the woman who brought complexity to roles that could have been simple stereotypes. Her performances crackled with intelligence and sexuality, making her one of Universal's biggest stars. Dean's career was built on her ability to portray strong, independent women who made their own choices, regardless of society's expectations. She was the antithesis of the helpless heroine, playing characters who were smart, resourceful, and unapologetically ambitious. Her films were popular with both male and female audiences, proving that viewers were ready for more complex female characters. But Dean's voice was her career's death sentence. When she spoke, the spell was broken. Her voice was thin and reedy, completely at odds with the powerful presence she projected on screen. The woman who had been convincing as a dangerous criminal mastermind suddenly sounded like she was trying too hard to be tough. Test audiences were reportedly disappointed by the disconnect between her appearance and her voice. Dean made a few early sound films, but they were commercial failures. She retired from acting in 1932 at just 39 years old, when she should have been entering her prime years as a character actress. She spent her later years working in real estate and living quietly in California. Dean's story proves that sometimes the most powerful screen presence can be undermined by the simplest technical limitation. Ramon Novarro. Ramon Novarro was Mexico's answer to Rudolph Valentino, a man who brought genuine Latin passion to Hollywood romance. With his sculpted features and intense screen presence, Novarro was the exotic lover who could make you believe in destiny with a single glance. His performance in Ben-Hur made him one of MGM's biggest stars, and his personal life, carefully managed by the studio, made him a heartthrob for millions of fans. But Navarro's success was built on a foundation of lies. Like William Haynes, he was gay in an industry that demanded heterosexual appeal. Unlike Haynes, he was willing to play the game, dating actresses for publicity and maintaining the illusion of available masculinity. The studio system protected him as long as he was profitable, but that protection came with a price. When sound arrived, Navarro's accent became problematic. His English was heavily accented, marking him as foreign in an industry increasingly suspicious of outsiders. More importantly, his voice somehow seemed to expose the artificiality of his romantic image. The man who had been convincing as a passionate lover suddenly seemed like he was acting the part rather than living it. Navarro continued working in Hollywood through the 1930s, but his career never recovered its former glory. He was relegated to supporting roles and B pictures, a far cry from his days as MGM's top romantic star. His later years were marked by financial struggles and personal difficulties. He was murdered in 1968 in a crime that shocked Hollywood, a tragic end to a life that had been built on carefully constructed illusions. 20 careers, 20 dreams, 20 reminders that Hollywood has always been a town built on shifting sand. These stars didn't just lose their jobs, they lost their identities, their futures, and sometimes their lives. But here's what the history books won't tell you. Their silent films remain masterpieces, while most early talkies are unwatchable relics. Maybe the real question isn't who survived the transition, but who was truly immortal all along. What do you think, progress or tragedy?